Now it must be time to talk about aggregate supply. We're going to go through it in the same pattern we've gone through supply and demand when we talked about the market model and aggregate demand so far in this model of aggregate supply and aggregate demand, whereas I'm going to define the term, and then we're going to get into how to graph it, and then we're going to get into the things that cause it to shift. So, defining the term, aggregate supply, the various quantities of output, or real GDP, the collected sellers would be willing or able to sell, manufacture, or create at various price levels. The aggregate supply curve thus illustrates the relationship between the level of prices and the quantity of output supplied. It now must be time to draw aggregate supply. It's going to get a little trickier than you might have imagined if you're not following along in the book or the notes. So here we go. Our GDP, just like it was for aggregate demand, price level, of course, just like it was for aggregate demand, but aggregate supply may not be exactly what you anticipated next. You see, there are two curves when we're talking about aggregate supply. There is the long-run aggregate supply curve, and there is a short-run aggregate supply curve. And I label it SRAS. Some textbooks just call it AS and LRAS. I figure if I'm using 4 letters here, why not use 4 letters there? It's just 2 letters. It helps clarify things. That's my thinking, anyway. Some books make this curved. Most, I think, make it straight. Some make aggregate demand curved, and some make it straight. I don't know of any texts that I can think of that make both short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand curved, which is, I think, kind of funny because sometimes they do one or the other. And unless we're discussing the aspects of why it might be curved, I just make them straight, mostly just for simplicity. Okay, so if you're looking at that going, I see it in the book as a curve, why is he drawing it straight? Just don't be alarmed. I'm just doing that to try to make it simple, and we can discuss the curvature when we have other things more comfortably under our belts. So we have a long-run aggregate supply and a short-run aggregate supply. So my task here really is explaining why that is so. So I'm going to start with thinking about this long-run aggregate supply curve in the context of something we're familiar with, the production possibilities curve. See, the production possibilities curve represented exactly that, the production possibilities of our economy with the resources we have now. So let me quickly draw a production possibilities curve for an economy. And I'm going to say that what we're going to analyze with our production possibilities curve, as we've always done, is 2 goods. I'm going to say goods, hopefully my marker keeps up, goods, I'll even throw services in, or services with plastic. So goods or services that have plastic either in their production or in the provision of the service. They use plastic. Up here I'm going to say goods or services without plastic. Well, goods or services with plastic versus goods or services without plastic. If you can think of a good or service that has plastic, that neither has plastic nor does not have plastic, I'd like to know about that. I think everything either has plastic or it doesn't have plastics. In other words, what I've done with these broad categories is tried to say that everything in our economy can be chosen, the production level of our economy can be chosen as some bundle of things that have plastic or don't have plastic. So this was with star, this is without star. So we choose an optimal production bundle of these goods, just because that's what we've been doing with the production possibilities curve. And that bundle is everything we can do in our economy. It's what we choose to do with the resources we have, and it's all we can do, just like it was before. If we get more resources, this can move out, right? Remember that? And we could produce more of either or both goods. Well, guess what? That's what goes on over here. This vertical line represents everything we can do in the economy with the resources we have. The determinants of this line, this is an easy list. I'm not even going to play around with a vertical list of 5 items, because we already have the list in this sense. Output is a function of labor, capital, natural resources, and human capital, all improved by technology. When we get more of any of one of these things or learn how to do things better, that's when we can have real economic growth where the productive capacity of our economy can rise. And what I'm saying is, and then this can move out with it. What I'm saying is this growth corresponds to this growth over here. It means the same thing. We can do more. We have more production possibilities. Our economy's productive capacity has grown over here. And it's a function of these things down here. So these are our determinants of aggregate supply. More of these things mean more of that thing. If we have something happening where we're losing laborers, this could shrink. If our machinery wears out, just as we could have depreciation here and our production possibilities could shrink, we could shrink over here. If something happens to our natural resources, perhaps a natural disaster or something, we could shrink over here. Our human the skill of our labor force, our human capital, that would kind of take a while for that to shrink, right? It would take generations to not get further education, but that could shrink that way, looking at the negatives. But most of the time we're talking about economic growth, and this thing is moving right because it's the productive capacity of the economy. So why do we have to have this short-run aggregate supply curve at all if what we're talking about is the productive capacity of our economy being long-run aggregate supply? And that is really because what Keynes observed and others observed in the 1930s. Since this is the productive capacity of our economy represented by this vertical line, when aggregate demand is down, we should just gravitate back to what we can do and move back to equilibrium, but that wasn't happening. So what we need to investigate or think about is how changes in the price level might actually lead to departures from our long-run capacity to produce in the economy. And an easy one for me to tease out in your minds, I think, is imagine you get a raise or you get offered more money or you can work and get overtime. Does that add to your willingness to produce goods and services, at least in the short run? So higher price levels, wages, getting paid overtime, greater compensation, lead to greater output in your mind for most people. So we can deviate from the capacity of the economy by working more hours. That's still the same number of laborers working more hours, at least in the short run, is a deviation, an example of a deviation from the long-run capacity of the economy to produce, perhaps due to some price level change. So it can be done. Just because this is the productive possibilities of the economy doesn't mean in the short run maybe we can't exceed that by people working overtime. And of course we know that we don't actually produce on our production possibilities curve. We have unemployment, and we have deviations from unemployment, right? We have cyclical unemployment. So deviations from the natural rate of unemployment. We have cyclical unemployment due to the business cycle. So sometimes we are producing inside of our production possibilities curve, and sometimes even further inside of our production possibilities curve. So we have a short-run relationship to price where lower prices may be in parallel with lesser output, and higher prices may be in parallel to greater levels of output around the productive capacity of our economy, given these resources that it takes for us to make goods and services. So just to wrap this up, to be clear, I've listed here, and I'm going to wrap this up because I am listing it differently than I have in my entire cadence of covering these models. This function represents the determinants of aggregate supply. They are this list: T, L, K, N, and H. Technology, labor, capital, natural resources, and human capital. These are the things that shift this. So I've deviated from my path a little bit and thrown in the fact that there are two curves that we can be talking about when we're talking about aggregate supply: a long-run aggregate supply curve or a short-run aggregate supply curve. And I think you know where we're going next. We're going to have to start tying these things together.